Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his country wants to have ties with the US based on trust and common objectives such as peace in Afghanistan. In an interview with New York Times, Khan said a political settlement is essential before the withdrawal of foreign forces. He said Pakistan will be the most affected country in case of a civil war in Afghanistan and that it will only recognize an elected government there. To a question, Khan said Pakistan and India can't have a normal relationship if the Kashmir conflict continues to fester. The Financial Action Task Force has recognized the significant progress made by Pakistan to counter terror financing. In a report, the task force said Pakistan has fulfilled 26 conditions out of 27 needed to exit the grey list. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the US is probing if the Taliban are at all serious about peace in Afghanistan. Speaking in Paris, Blinken said actions to take the country by force are totally inconsistent with a peaceful resolution. Meanwhile, the Taliban claim to have captured 4 more districts in Afghanistan. The US and France have warned Iran that time is running out for Tehran to revive the nuclear deal. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his French counterpart Jean-Yves Le Drian were addressing a press conference in Paris. They also voiced a fear that Tehran's atomic activities could advance if talks drag on. However, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said a revival of the deal is within reach. The global number of coronavirus cases has surpassed 180 million, with the death toll has crossed 3.9 million. In Brazil, over 2,000 people lost their lives to the virus, while more than 73,000 tested positive overnight. Meanwhile, authorities in Pakistan have warned of the 4th wave of COVID-19 in the absence of SOPs enforcement and continued vaccination. The country has registered 44 deaths and over 1,000 infections in the last 24 hours. And in tennis, Lorenzo Sonego has qualified for the semi-finals of the Eastbourne International Open. He overpowered Max Purcell by 2-1. Sonego will next face the winner of the match between Alex de Minaur and Kwon Soon Vo. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his country wants to have ties with the US based on trust and common objectives such as peace in Afghanistan. In an interview with New York Times, Khan said a political settlement is essential before the withdrawal of foreign troops. He said Pakistan will be the most affected country in case of a civil war in Afghanistan. The Prime Minister added that Pakistan will only recognize an elected government in Afghanistan. He said Islamabad will do all to help resolve the conflict. To a question, Khan said Pakistan and India can't have a normal relationship if the Kashmir conflict continues to fester. He also said India shouldn't take on the role of being Washington's bulwark against China, as this will hurt its economy. The Financial Action Task Force has recognized the significant progress made by Pakistan to counter terror financing. In a report, the task force said Pakistan has fulfilled 26 conditions out of 27 needed to exit the grey list. It said the country has formulated a risk-based strategy and a detailed roadmap to address the remaining concerns. FATF also highlighted that Pakistan's financial sector regulatory framework is aligned with international best practices. Meanwhile, the Pakistan's government expressed confidence that the new action plan on money laundering will be implemented within 12 months. Addressing a press conference, Federal Minister for Energy Hamad Azhar said the world is acknowledging Pakistan's efforts today. The next plenary is due to take place in October. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. is probing if the Taliban are serious at all about peace in Afghanistan. He was addressing a joint news conference with his French counterpart in Paris. Referring to the Taliban's renewed offensive in Afghanistan, he said the group's actions are totally inconsistent with a peaceful resolution. He said Washington is looking carefully at the situation on the ground amid the withdrawal of foreign troops. A U.S. media report suggests that at least 650 troops are likely to remain in Afghanistan to provide security for diplomats. Meanwhile, the Taliban claim to have seized 4 more districts as they ramped up attacks on Afghan forces. U.S. President Joe Biden will meet his Afghan counterpart Ashraf Ghani and Chief Negotiator Abdullah at the Oval Office today. The two sides will discuss U.S. troops withdrawal amid increased Taliban advances across Afghanistan. A White House Deputy Press Secretary says Biden will urge Ghani and Abdullah to be a united front. Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said he will also reaffirm the U.S. support for a negotiated peace deal. Karine added that the president will focus on his commitment to the Afghan people and security forces. Earlier, Biden said he will relocate Afghan workers who assisted U.S. troops to a third country until their visas are processed. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says the international community must take note of repeated incidents of illicit uranium sales in India. He made these remarks during an interactive session with foreign military officers in Islamabad. Alvi warned that such radioactive material could fall into the wrong hands, endangering human lives and international security. Several people were arrested in India while trying to sell uranium in the past few months. Pakistan's Foreign Office has earlier called for an investigation into such incidents. Pakistan says the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with Kashmiri politicians was mere puppetry. In a press briefing, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the all-party conference did not produce any result. He said the Modi regime gave no response to the demand for the restoration of the valley's special status. He added that even the pro-Delhi Kashmiri politicians are now opposing the centre. Qureshi said Modi's illegal actions in Kashmir have damaged his image within the country as well as at the international level. Thursday's meeting was first such political engagement since New Delhi stripped the region of its autonomy in August 2019. Moving on, Indian troops have martyred another civilian during a military raid in occupied Kashmir's Shopian district. The occupation troops have killed 5 Kashmiris in similar raids since Sunday. Fake encounters and extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris have become a new norm in the region after India revoked its autonomy in August 2019. More than 300 Kashmiris have been martyred since then. In Pakistan, 5 soldiers have been martyred while thwarting a terrorist attack in Balochistan province. The military's media wing says it inflicted heavy losses on terrorists in Sangan area of Sibbi. It says an operation is underway to block escape routes and apprehend the culprits. The army said cowardly acts backed by hostile international agencies cannot sabotage peace in Balochistan. It said the security forces are determined to neutralize nefarious designs of enemies. The US and France have warned Iran that time is running out for Tehran to revive the nuclear deal. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his French counterpart Jean-Yves Le Drian were addressing a press conference in Paris. They also voiced fear that Tehran's atomic activities could advance if talks drag on. Blinken said Iran's failure to extend a monitoring agreement with the UN nuclear watchdog will pose a serious concern in the revival talks. Meanwhile, the IAEA said Iran has not responded on extending their monitoring agreement that expired last night. However, agency's chief Rafael Grossi stressed the importance of continuing its data collection on Tehran's nuclear activities under the agreement. The sixth round of indirect talks in Vienna was adjourned on Sunday, with key issues still unresolved. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has accused Britain and the US of trying to incite a conflict in the Black Sea. Moscow and London have sparred over the incursion of a British Navy ship in waters claimed by Russia. State media quoted Ryabkov as saying Russia will defend its borders by all possible means. A foreign ministry spokesperson said Moscow is certain that London's actions were approved by the US. Russia has also threatened to bomb Britain's vessels in case of further provocations. Moscow claims it prevented the ship from violating its territorial waters of Crimea on Wednesday. However, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says his country's warship was acting legally in international waters. Russia has expressed disappointment over the failure of European leaders' agreement on a proposed EU-Moscow summit.
The Kremlin said it is still wishful and interested in improving working relations between Moscow and Brussels. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the European position is fragmented, not always consistent, and sometimes unclear. Earlier, the idea of the summit was dropped after Poland and Baltic countries said it would send the wrong message to Russia as East-West ties worsen. Latvia's Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš said the EU risked pleasing Russia with the summit after diplomacy has failed to end the conflict in Ukraine. Premiers of Germany and France had given the idea of a summit by saying it would be a dialogue to defend the EU's interests.
Russia says it is actively working with the US on the issue of resuming inspections within the framework of the New START Treaty. In a press briefing, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said no agreements have been reached so far. He said balanced measures are necessary to ensure the treaty's normal implementation in terms of its verification. Ryabkov said the work on the revival of the treaty's implementation has been ongoing for some time now. However, he said talks are halted at present due to COVID-19 restrictions. Moscow and Washington agreed to extend the treaty for 5 years in January, with only 2 days remaining until its expiration. US Ambassador to Russia John Sullivan has returned to Moscow after the Putin-Biden summit in Geneva. In a statement, Sullivan said he is ready to work with Russia for a stable and predictable bilateral relationship. Earlier, in comments to Russian media, the envoy said both powers should be open and frank with each other. Sullivan left Moscow in April, saying he was traveling to Washington for consultations. The Kremlin had suggested that the United States recall him amid a diplomatic crisis between the two countries. The United Nations says Israel is violating international law by expanding settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. In a briefing, a UN Middle East envoy Tor Venezuelan urged Israel's new government to halt their expansion immediately.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres and Venezuelan reported on the implementation of a Security Council resolution against Israeli settlements. The Mideast envoy said the settlements are a major obstacle to the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Israel has recently approved a plan to add 540 housing units to the Har Homa settlement in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, in an interview, the Palestinian envoy to the UN, Riyad Mansour, said the rebuilding of Gaza requires a permanent ceasefire. He said it will be difficult to sustain the truce without the involvement of the Mideast Quartet. Earlier, dozens of Israeli settlers forced their way into the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in East Jerusalem.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The global number of coronavirus cases has surpassed 180 million, while the death toll has crossed 3.9 million. Brazil has registered more than 2,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 73,000 new cases overnight. More in this report.
As countries lag in their vaccination campaigns, the World Health Organization has forecast that most people vulnerable to COVID-19 will need to get an annual booster to be protected against variants. The statement comes as the world struggles against the Delta variant that originated in India. U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Americans to take advantage of vaccinations.
And unvaccinated people are incredibly vulnerable. This is a serious concern with what experts call the Delta variant. It is not only, according to the CDC, between 10 and 20% of all cases in the last 2 weeks have been the Delta variant.
In Australia, Sydney's 4 local areas have been put into lockdown for at least another week to contain a spike in the Delta variant. Japanese media says a member of the Ugandan Olympics team who tested positive upon arrival also had the Delta variant. In Europe, stricter restrictions will be imposed across Portugal's Lisbon region. The Delta variant accounts for more than half of the city's cases and threatens the holiday season.
Portugal is now clearly in the red zone and the conditions are not there to continue the lockdown easing plan. The incidence is currently 129.6% and the R rate is 1.18 in mainland Portugal. Over in the United Kingdom, ministers have sought to rescue the summer holiday season by easing travel restrictions for several tourist spots. But as the Delta variant continues to spread in the UK, Hong Kong has reclassified Britain as a very high-risk country. Meanwhile, the African Union has accused the world's richest nations of deliberately failing to provide enough vaccines to the continent.
In Pakistan, the government says the 4th wave of COVID-19 can emerge in absence of SOPs enforcement and continued vaccination. After the NCOC session, Planning Minister Asad Umar urged people to get vaccinated immediately. The country has registered 44 more coronavirus-linked deaths and over 1,000 cases in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the virus has infected nearly 953,000 cases and claimed over 22,000 lives so far. Pakistan's Navy ship Azalafcard has visited Aqaba, Jordan's port, in connection with Amman's centenary celebrations. A Navy spokesperson said the mission commander met the governor of Aqaba and discussed matters of mutual interest. The commander also conveyed Pakistan Naval Chief's message of goodwill to the people and the Navy of Jordan. Moreover, the navies of the two states held a joint parade as well. In Iraq, 5 policemen have been killed in a bomb blast in Kirkuk province. Police said the officers were on a patrol when their vehicle hit the explosive device planted by the militants. Security forces have cordoned off the area and began a large-scale combing operation. So far, no group has claimed the responsibility for the attack. In recent months, ISIS terrorists have escalated their attacks in the area. The UK has reaffirmed its support for Libya's stability and transition to democracy. Prime Minister Boris Johnson met Libya's interim Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dabeiba in London. According to a Downing Street statement, the two leaders discussed security concerns in Libya. They mulled over the destabilizing presence of foreign fighters and national elections. Johnson praised the upcoming opening of Libyan National Oil Corporation hub in London. The leaders resolved to boost bilateral trade and investment. Johnson encouraged Libya to ratify the Paris Agreement and hoped it would attend the upcoming climate summit. The US says it only recognizes President Abdurrahman Surhadis' government as legitimate in Yemen. The State Department clarified its special envoy's comments that the US recognizes the Houthi rebels as a legitimate actor. In a series of tweets, the office said Houthis are an integral part of any peace process. However, it said the US remains concerned about their focus on waging war. The office said the rebels are exacerbating the suffering of Yemeni citizens rather than being part of the solution. Earlier, Washington said not considering the Houthis part of the conflict is wishful thinking as they control people and territory in Yemen. The WHO has warned of humanitarian catastrophe if cross-border aid operation into northwest Syria is not renewed. The health body raised the alarm ahead of the next month's meeting between Russia and the Western members of the UN Security Council. Millions depend on aid currently funneled from Turkey into Syria. The arrangement was authorized by the Security Council. According to the UN, nearly 1,000 trucks use the Bab al-Hawa crossing every month to deliver aid to people along the Turkish border. But Moscow argues that aid can be delivered to northern Syria from the capital Damascus. However, the WHO says UN efforts to create a supply route from Damascus have not been successful in the past 11 months. Turkey says it has killed 3 fighters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in an anti-terror operation in northern Iraq. In a tweet, the Turkish Defense Ministry said 1 militant was killed in the Avasin-Basiyan region and 2 in Hakurk. It said the ground forces raided the hideouts of the militants. Ankara holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. The U.S. has given a green signal to the sale of F-16 fighter jets and Sidewinder and Harpoon missiles to the Philippines. The Pentagon said the State Department has approved 3 separate deals worth more than $2.5 billion to Manila. It said the Philippines requested to buy 12 aircrafts made by Lockheed Martin. Despite State Department's approval, the notification does not indicate that a contract has been signed or negotiations have been finalized. U.S. President Joe Biden says a $1.2 trillion bipartisan deal has been reached on an infrastructure spending plan. Biden announced this after a meeting with a group of Democrat and Republican senators. The president said not everyone got what they wanted, but the group came up with a good compromise. The 8-year plan includes funding for roads, bridges, the power grid, public transport, and the internet. The White House says the framework represents the largest investment in public transit in history. It says 100% of the Lee pipes and service lines in the U.S. will be replaced. The move will benefit up to 10 million American households and 400,000 schools and child care facilities. In the U.S., the death toll from a residential building collapse near Miami has risen to 4. At least 159 others are still missing after the 12-story residential apartment collapsed on Thursday. President Joe Biden has approved an emergency declaration in Florida. He also ordered federal assistance to supplement state and local response efforts. The cause of the collapse remains unknown, but local officials say the 12-story tower was undergoing roof construction and other repairs. In China, at least 18 people have died in a fire at a martial arts center in central Henan province. Authorities say 16 others have been injured in the blaze that broke out in the Shaanxi city. Officials said 4 of those injured are in a critical condition. They said it is unclear what caused the fire, but it has been extinguished. Police have detained the person in charge of the center. In the Czech Republic, at least 3 people have died, with nearly 150 others injured after a tornado struck along the southern border. In a tweet, Interior Minister Jan Hamasek said the situation is serious and all emergency service units are at work. The minister said a state of emergency has been declared in the area. Czech meteorologists said the tornado may have reached F4 levels, with winds hitting above 322 kilometers per hour. In the Philippines, a group of volunteers has taken up the task of cleaning one of the world's most polluting Pasig River in Manila. More in this report.
Each morning, men and women in rubber boots and gloves can be seen hauling sacks of trash to pick up garbage in and around the Pasig River. Founded over a decade ago, the group called themselves the River Warriors. Dexter Opiana picks up an average of 80 to 100 sacks of garbage daily, with even more during the monsoon season. Sometimes, however, that number can reach up to 1,000 sacks in one day.
Nga po pala si Dexter Opiana.
My name is Dexter Opiana. I'm one of the river warriors of PRCMO, Pasig River Coordinating and Management Office, and I've been a river warrior for over 6 years.
They started as volunteers but now receive a basic income from the government and operate in small groups at different parts of the river. Most of the trash they collect along the river banks are plastic wrappers, packaging materials. And since the pandemic, face masks are also mixed in with the other floating garbage.
I think the solution of this is that we have to relocate the informal settlers living along the Pasig River and punish all the commercial establishment who have this untreated water waste.
According to research by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Pasig River alone contributes to 6.43% of the world's ocean plastics waste.
Catalonia's human towers, known as castellers, have returned after over a year. Observers say the practice is a symbol of togetherness, elimination of class differences, and the city's welcoming atmosphere. More in this report.
There are currently 60 to 70 Castell teams in Catalonia, some of which appear at large biannual competitions in Tarragona. Castells are constructed by Catalans of all ages by stacking on top of each other by climbing backs and shoulders. The most ambitious castells stretch 10 levels high. Each level is the height of a person.
For me, this means a lot. Although it's very different from previous years, I feel this excitement of the castles again. I already missed it a lot, and I think we are getting closer and closer to being able to relive it as before.
The 200-year-old tradition, which takes place at the festival, requires skill, strength, and most of all, trust to assemble and dismantle the tower. The teams are awarded points based on the height of the towers built.
We have had good safety measures. They have done PCR and antigen tests in each rehearsal. All the castellers have been very well monitored. We are really very proud and happy with how well everything has been done. It has been very effective also.
The practice was first documented in 1801 as a cultural activity and became a competition in the 1980s. After being declared an intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO in 2010, castells are recognized as having a rich cultural diversity and significance within Catalonia. For some practitioners, building castells is also a demonstration of nationalism.
Nearly 6 decades ago, France's prehistoric Lascaux caves were made off-limits, but now visitors will again be able to tour the site, only this time in virtual reality. More in this report.
The Lascaux cave network, discovered in 1940 by a boy whose dog fell down a hole, contains paintings of animals, human figures, and abstract signs that date back as far as 17,000 years. It was closed to the public in 1963 after the carbon dioxide, heat, and humidity of nearly 2,000 visitors a day began damaging the paintings. But now, thanks to virtual reality, the caves are back in view.
At the start of the project, we acquired a set of 3D data of the Lascaux cave collected during several digitalization campaigns. This data was then integrated into the software that we developed here in this research lab. And using this data and this software, we built the different steps of this visit.
From July 8th, groups of 6 people wearing virtual reality headsets will be able to take a 45-minute tour through the 235-meter-long cave network, dubbed the Sistine Chapel of the prehistoric era.
The interest of this visit is to show things that cannot be easily reproduced in a printout, notably 2 sectors that are still unseen by the public. The well sector that is entirely reproduced, and most importantly, the Felines Gallery and the Felines Cabinet, which even when the actual cave was open to the public, no one could access because you needed to find your way through very narrow passages.
In 1979, several decorated caves of the Vézère Valley, including the Lascaux Cave, were added to the UNESCO World Heritage Sites list.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. And now the business updates. The Wall Street stocks have risen as investors pinned hopes on the economy to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Weaker than expected inflation data eased worries about a sudden tapering in stimulus by the Federal Reserve. The S&P 500 traded 0.25% higher, while Nasdaq Composite has also gained marginally. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index traded over 0.5% up. Meanwhile, the oil prices also surged on strong demand. Another weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.